It is with great joy that I'm able to have this conversation with Charlie Mitchell today. She is a FreeMind facilitator. She specializes in working with parents who have children who see the world differently. But I'm super excited because she's written an amazing book that we're going to have a talk about tonight. I just think it's a stroke of genius. And so, Charlie, I just really want to honor you for what you've tried to do and what you've managed to achieve with that book. And so hold it up for people to see.
Here it is. This is a proof copy, so the actual copy won't have the grey line across the top, but this is my very prized copy, very tea stained, but yes, very loved.
And please announce the title for me.
So it's called Gifts from the Heart of the Storm. And I wrote it, and I also had the illustrations done by a person called Matthew Wiggins.
Beautiful. And it is, the illustrations are epic. And so maybe we could start with, what was your intention? Like, if that book does what you set out for it to do, what's it there for? What's the DNA of your intention?
The intention is to be able to land with as many parents with children who experience the world differently. So that could be parents who have children with disabilities. It could be children who have illnesses. It could be behavioural or sensory differences. And for them to be able to be inspired to go on a bit of a journey and be able to heal some of the challenges that they've experienced. And the kind of ultimate aim is for them to be able to support their kids much more effectively as a result of their own healing journey. So it is about the parents, but ultimately it's about the kids being able to get access to incredible parents who have much more capacity to support them.
Helping the parents feel free, and obviously by that process helping the kids to, have parents that have much more understanding and space and time and capacity, I guess, to manage the challenges that can go along with some of those things. And just so people get an understanding of your authority, I'd like you just to, in a short while, just summarize the last year that you've had with the variety of challenges you've been facing. These are battle-tested tools, right?
Yeah, this has come from a really personal place. So on the 4th of March last year, I actually had quite an interesting day. I submitted my FreeMind facilitator case studies at about 2:00 in the afternoon, having had a couple of clients that I was working with that morning, parents that I was working with. Later that day, my youngest son, became very, very unwell, and I actually ended up taking him to A&E as a result. And within a matter of hours, they confirmed that he had leukemia. And we were transferred immediately into Bristol Children's Hospital, and we started what became a 4-month intensive treatment for the leukemia. He already has Down syndrome, so there were complications in treating the leukemia, and he actually had a toxic reaction to the chemotherapy and became very, very, very much more seriously unwell than he was when we went in, and he wasn't in a great place when we went in. So it was a very, very difficult time. He had a reaction to a blood transfusion. He had, there were a whole host of difficulties where things were kind of in the balance, and his life was in the balance, and it was a very, very, very difficult time. During that time, obviously, we had COVID going on, and so none of my friends or family could come and visit. There was no time off from the ward. I wasn't able to leave the room. That was a very, very tiny room that we were staying in. So that was an incredible pressure on my family as well as on me. And during that time, my eldest child, who has autism, also developed anorexia. And so at that point, I was in hospital with Thomas, having discussions with a different hospital about the possibility of my daughter being admitted to a different hospital, because they became very, very unwell very, very quickly. And it was an excruciating situation as a parent to have 2 children critically ill with life-threatening conditions at the same time. I mean, it was a horrific time, and and during that time I wrote, and I just needed to get my feelings out. I needed to get my emotions out, and I needed to do that in a kind of in a in a dramatic way, but also in a safe way that could support me and support my journey. Because I still needed to be there for my son. I still needed to be able to function for him. I was still his main caregiver, and needed to be an upright functioning person. So
which at times must have been nigh on impossible, and would have been impossible, right? And so you're just cobbling together broken tools to cope as best as you could. And I'm in awe of how well you did, considering all those things and all the people that came together to support you and your family, and just the love that was shown and the care, but you in the middle of it, and so this story, perhaps you'd like to give a synopsis of this story, because I just think, as I read it, my heart was going out to you as you journeyed with these intense emotions. It's as I read it, as I understood it, it's a journey through stages of emotion, and the stages of the healing journey, and I think everybody, whether they're in intense storms of their own, or if they're just human, because storms come, right? So it's good to be clear on the phases and stages of grief and healing and surrender and so on, so that we're prepared for when those storms hit, right? And so I really do believe it's a book for everybody. And so tell us a little bit about the kind of synopsis of that journey through that phase.
So I was writing and as I was writing, I didn't know what the next sort of stage would be or what the next step would be, but I knew what I needed to get out on the paper that day. And so I just wrote, and then I wrote a bit more, and then I started to kind of look back through some of it, and some of it was just total nonsense, I'll be honest. I started to notice that actually there was a journey to it, and there was a pattern to it, and there was I could see I could start to kind of piece a trail together, and I still couldn't identify where it was going to end, but I could see that there were like breadcrumbs of a trail. And so I carried on, and it was through very different emotions, through some really, really, really challenging and difficult emotions. And it felt really important to honor those and express them and be true about those. I was in an environment where the nurses quite often said, don't cry, be strong in front of your son, put the kettle on, have a cup of tea. And they also said things like, when people come out of hospital, they often collapse into a little heap. And I sort of thought, well, yes, I can see why, if they're following your advice to not have any emotion while in hospital, then they will collapse and have a cup of tea they will collapse at the end. So I was determined to honor my own journey and honor the truth of those emotions, and say, actually, this isn't about toxic positivity. This is about what it really feels like. And this is how so there is a range of emotions in there.
And I think, this whole idea of being strong for our kids, right? I mean, it's like, obviously it has to move through phases. I think if we were just constantly on the floor and feeling hopeless, then our children would be deeply destabilized by that. But if your child is profoundly ill and they saw that you're profoundly upset about it, that equates to love, right? Now, you don't want that to make them feel additional fear, but it also will enable them to understand this is a serious situation. This whole, sometimes the old paternal form of medicine where they wouldn't even really tell the patient that they were that ill. It's like, oh God, I want to know. I want to, it's just like this whole make it more comfortable thing. It's just like that is not what we need. We need the courage to be able to sail into the middle of the storm and admit that we're in a storm and that we're afraid and that we're lost, and and to hold together, and so I mean, I loved the journey that you described, and the way in which you talked about the different phases. I understood them. They felt very universal. I could relate to them, and yet there is this, you start weaving the hope through it somehow. Like there's a hope for hope, at least when it seems hopeless, right?
And it was really fascinating, because that's what I found, was that as I wrote, I started to notice that actually there were some amazing moments in this situation. You know, okay, that you could argue for the difficulty, you can argue for how challenging it was, but there were beautiful moments in there, and I started to just, there started to be glimmers around the edges, and I just thought, actually there's more to this, and Thomas became very, very unwell, and we didn't know how things were going to go, and that was the reality of the situation. And there were doctors not knowing, you know, how things were going to turn out, and that's a scary thing. And I was trying to work out, how do I sit with this? How do I manage this? How do I manage these emotions on my own in this situation, with nobody to talk to about it in any kind of what I would call a meaningful way? And so, yeah, what I found was these moments where actually, if I could sit with the spectrum of possibilities, and the spectrum of possibilities were from pretty devastating, that he could pass away, through to he could get better and go on to live a very normal and very active life. And I started to notice that in the moments where I could hold these possibilities and be open to the possibilities and sit with them, that I could be so much more present and available for him, and able to really sit with him, and able to hold his hand and look into his eyes and know that I could just be fully present and really connect deeply with him. And I could notice that there were little tiny things that made a difference. You know, he was very, very unwell, and not even able to sign, not able to talk. But there were tiny gestures he could make. And like, there was one time where he was very much enjoying having his leg stroked, and he couldn't really smile, but he just inched his leg just like a tiny bit across the bed, just a little bit closer, like, actually that feels really good. You know, and it was just a lovely moment. And it could have been half an inch that he moved his leg, and it would have been so easy for me to miss that in the middle of all of everything. You know, when you're caught up in grief and caught up in emotion and caught up in you know, fear, it's really easy to be kind of out here, I feel it like it's out of my body, like I'm not really in this moment. And yet when I could connect with all of these possibilities, I could sit with him and be with him in a different kind of way. And then I could find these magical moments that actually connected us really deeply. And there, that was really, that was really incredible to me, to notice these little aspects that I know would have passed me by, and probably did pass me by when I was just completely caught up in the fear and the uncertainty.
Yeah, beautiful. As you well know, the third pillar of FreeMind is all about surrender and transcendence, and a part of that is finding some peace with our mortality and the mortality of our children, and creating space to give permission for all eventualities. And understandably, people get really challenged by that. You know, what do you mean you're taking me on a deep meditative journey to give permission to life to not be there for me and my children? And it's like, well, that is the reality of life. It's a given. Obviously, we can have a prayer that our children live a long time and that we live a long and pain-free life. And of course, that's fine to have that hope and that prayer, but to be surrendered to all possibilities is exactly that. It makes somehow every breath more precious, every laugh more golden. It brings a vitality to our life when we have surrendered to death. And a lot of people, you'll say that to, they're like, yeah, no, I'm fine with dying. And then you're like, okay, well, let's take you on a journey to really give that the deepest permission. People think by giving it permission, you're kind of inviting the Grim Reaper to your door the next day, you know, and it isn't that. Arguably, I think you then operate in life with more ease and grace, and therefore less stress, less cortisol, less likely to have problematic health conditions. And so by surrendering to death, we're much more likely to notice more of the joy, but actually ironically live longer, and certainly live better whilst we're alive. So, I mean, what an incredibly awful, powerful kind of rite of passage to explore the intensity of those possibilities, you know, for you right there, just noticing. It's like, wow, I'm actually holding this. And of course, There will be times when the chaos overran you, right? Totally, and you weren't at all. The sound of plates spinning, crashing to the floor, and you just having to watch them, or worse, like choose which plate you would allow to fall.
Yeah.
Right, at times.
Yeah.
And so my heart goes out to you, and goes out to all the people watching this that are having to make those kind of decisions about their own welfare, certainly, but also even sometimes sort of the welfare of their other children. And so within family structures, when there is a profoundly ill child, sometimes the worst effect is on the other children, who just don't get a look in for a little while because there's just no chance they can.
Yeah.
And I've helped lots of clients have to process being the well sibling.
Absolutely. Yeah, I can really relate to that, very, very much so. And it's a very, very difficult journey to watch a sibling, and you know, even from a distance, become so incredibly unwell. It's a very, very traumatic for the other family members. It's really tough. But I wanted to honor the, you know, I came to this place in hospital having had the tools that you'd given me the previous year. You know, I spent a lot of lockdown immersed in FreeMind work, in FreeMind healing processes, and I'd sat with a lot of emotion, and I'd sat with some really difficult things from my past that had been really amazing, and I really felt that that was such an incredible foundation to then go into this place with. And I want to just honor that, because it was so helpful to already have processed quite a lot of difficult stuff, and to have created a container for myself where I knew that I wasn't scared of my own emotion. I wasn't scared of my own feelings. I knew I wasn't going to get overwhelmed. And I think that was the bit that perhaps that's what the nurses were concerned about, is people getting so overwhelmed by their own emotions that they're not able to function. But I knew that wasn't where I was going. You know, I could be really sad. And at times, Thomas, you know, I was in with Thomas one day, and a nurse came in, and Thomas signed to the nurse. He signed, "Mummy's sad." And then he carried on playing, because for him, it was like, oh, look, that's what Mummy's doing over there. But it's okay, you know, it's all right. I'm okay. She's okay. She just happens to be a bit sad, but that's, you know. So it was interesting. Yeah, it was interesting.
What I've seen, both in my role as a parent, but also carers, whether it's nurses or therapists, it's like we can only hold space and be comfortable with people going to those places if we have gone to those places ourselves. And even for me, I went to a really, really dark place. And it was like, oh, that's a missing piece in my process. And because I haven't been able to hold that for myself, that's never turned up with my clients. They've probably turned up a lot, but that hasn't come up for them, because their souls felt that can't be held by this guy because it's not complete in him. Yeah. And I'm able to take people to their stuff way quicker than I did when I started, because I've done so much on myself. Their soul can feel that. And it, you know, so it's like, I mean, that's why it's so valuable if we could, in an enlightened world, all of the medical team, all of the nurses, everyone would be like super emotionally intelligent. They'll have done all their process work, come to terms with life and death, and then the holding, but also the wisdom in treatment. I mean, I haven't yet met a doctor who isn't afraid of death, like profoundly afraid of death. Arguably, this is the primary reason why they have probably chosen that as a career. I realize that's a vast generalization. I haven't met all the doctors in the world, and I'm sure that's not true for every single one of them, just every single one I've met.
Well, that's a fair experiment.
Right, you know, so it, you know, and that and I mean, even recently I was kind of, you know, I don't want to get into scientism and some of that stuff, but I was amazed to discover that the slogan of Pfizer is "Science will win." It's like, that's not helpful. It's not helpful. It's actually a beautiful intention, but it's so off. It's terrifying, you know. And it's like, we can't battle with nature, we can't battle with life, we can't battle with season. It's all going to end. It's all going to fucking die. And my French there, can edit that out. You know,
Brilliant.
It's an important part. It's a really, really important part of us being able to be here.
Absolutely. Yeah. And to really be here, that was what I really felt that. What I did find fascinating was it took about a month to get to surrender, because I was so resistant to it. And I was so determined that there'd be another way around it. And actually I'd written the whole book, I'd written the whole lot, and I still didn't get to surrender. And so it was really fascinating that it was like the last bit of the jigsaw. And actually I decided to put it in the middle of the book because it felt more appropriate. But I went to surrender kicking and screaming. I really did. It really wasn't my first choice.
No, I mean, that's when surrender counts, right? If we're surrendering to, oh, shall I have option sweet B or option nice C, right? Then it's not really powerful work, right? It's when we're surrendering to the ultimate horrors that that we really understand. It's like, wow, no, of course it goes, so much of the structure of our psychology is like, I will be brilliant and I will find a way through.
Yes.
Right. That's the center point. It's like Pfizer's science will win. It's like brilliance or money, or it's like something can make this different, and I can forge that with will.
Yeah.
And
exactly
it's like
that.
Sometimes sometimes not. And it's like, and it takes us to the primary resistance. People think they get angry because the fax won't send, or because someone cut them up in traffic. And it's not that. It's the primary futility of our battle against the current of life and death.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's been a fascinating journey, absolutely fascinating. And I just felt so strongly as I was writing and as things were coming together that I needed to share this. It felt like a real, it felt so imperative. It just felt like a really deep kind of pull. And there was also a real kind of horror of like, oh my goodness, this is so raw and this is so personal that how could I possibly share any of this with anybody? And yet that there was something deeper that overrode that said, this just has to be out in the world. This has to be, and you just have to trust that some people won't appreciate it or won't get it or won't be ready for it. And the people that need it really need it, and it really needs to be there. So yeah, it's been an interesting journey.
Well, as you know, one of the kind of things we say in FreeMind, is that which is when we're encouraging people in the power of sharing circles, right? Well, healing circles, and people are sharing. It's like encouraging people to say that thing which is so deeply personal, because that which is so intrinsically personal to us, it seems to be that which is so universally relevant to everyone. Right. And I felt that reading the book. It's just like you're describing the shape of a broken heart, and how it finds its way back home. It's and I love the part when you've found land and you're amongst the community and the friends, and then they encourage you to go on this journey. I wonder if you can speak a little bit about that kind of inner rescue work that you speak to, which is a really structural part of the stuff that makes a difference in a person's life. So just talk a little bit about that.
It just felt so relevant and so important to explore that healing journey and that inner child work, some of which I'd actually done the year before rather than actually while I was in hospital. So some of that inner child work was work that you and I had done in the panoramic container, through that FreeMind container when we were in lockdown. But it had been so liberating for me to be able to really hold space for those little people within me, those inner children who were so wounded by some of the challenges that I'd had growing up. I love my parents dearly. They are amazing people, and they've given me some incredible gifts. And they were in their own storm when I was a child, and they were when I was growing up. And so part of the journey in the book is about going back to some of those earlier woundings and actually being with that child, being with that part of me that was 7, that was sat on the stairs listening to my parents argue, and being able to sit with me and hold me. And there's an absolutely incredible picture that Matt, who did the illustrations for this, is absolutely astounding. And he really got it in a way that was just incredible. So this is one of the pictures of me sitting with me, and actually having somebody to depict that was mind-blowing for me. You know, it was absolutely incredible. But just to be able to have that opportunity to give myself that love that I was looking for and that I needed so badly when I was 7, and I was reaching out for. And that little 7-year-old was just haunted really for all of the life on, you know, from 7-year-old onwards. And that little 7-year-old was reaching out for love throughout my adult life in all kinds of ways that actually weren't very helpful, actually weren't very productive, that make sense if you're 7 but don't make sense if you're 37. and led to some really difficult relationships in my adult life that weren't helpful, you know, that I had some real difficulties with relationships as an adult. And I just didn't realize, I hadn't pieced it together, that little bit of me was still so wounded and still needed so much support. And it came up in my parenting. It came up in situations where I was with my eldest in particular, who was having behavioural issues, and they were experiencing and expressing themselves. And in that experience, that was then kind of tapping into that wounded part of me. And I found that I then responded in a particular way, and in ways that I didn't want to respond. And actually, you know, I said to them afterwards, I'm really sorry, you know, because that isn't how I want to behave. But, you know, I found it really hard sometimes to hold myself back. And anger was a real common place that I would go to. And it wasn't until we went on that journey through the FreeMind work where I actually started to realize, crikey, this little 7-year-old is quite ferocious. Oh my goodness, they're really going for it. And they really, you know, they really need love, and they really want this love, and they really deserve it. My goodness, they deserve it. And they've been looking for it for so long. And so for me to have that opportunity to be with them and nurture them and nourish them and go play with them and allow them to dance and allow them to play in a way that they didn't really get to do when they were actually 7 was completely liberating and completely life-changing for me. And what I noticed in that dynamic, particularly with my eldest, was that when they were ferocious, when my eldest was ferocious, which they can be at times, I could notice perhaps the ferociousness in my 7-year-old starting to rear, and I could go, okay, well, actually, I've got space for both of you here, and I can see that my little inner 7-year-old is upset, but I don't have to respond from that place. And actually, I can just take her to one side and say, you know what, come on, let's go. We'll play later. Right now, I need to be present for my eldest, and I need to be here with them. And so it gave me a really different kind of capacity to be able to be with my eldest and with all my children, because I could be there from a place of an adult rather than be there from a place of a 7-year-old. And it was massively healing for me. I know it's been massively healing for my eldest, although they obviously wouldn't have, you know, I haven't explained it to them in the way that I'm describing here, so they wouldn't necessarily understand why it's been healing for them. But they can see that mummy's got a bit better at supporting them, and can connect a bit more with some empathy and
not raging back at me. Yeah.
Doesn't necessarily fly off the handle in the way that she might have done in the past. So it's just been amazing, absolutely amazing. And then to notice these different parts of me and these different ages, and notice these, you know, these woundings. I think of my inner child work now as anything that's happened, you know, yesterday or before. You know, it's, for me, it isn't just about 7-year-olds. It's about 45-year-old me who really struggled with Thomas in hospital. So it could be any time that I've had a wounding in the past that I may go back and need to support. And then it's just beautiful, such a beautiful experience to be able to open my arms to all of those experiences and just welcome them in and say, yeah, it's okay, it's all right. You may not have behaved as you wanted to, you did the best you could at the time, and that's okay.
Beautiful. It's amazing to me. There's been a massive kind of emergence of art speaking to this journey. So your book, Elton John's film The Rocket Man, I don't know if you've seen it, but it's an unbelievable story of inner child work. It's
I haven't.
Absolutely incredible.
Really?
There's a new Disney movie out called Turning Red, which is all to do with a little girl who becomes a red panda when she gets angry, and her journey to accept that part of herself and integrate it, and her family trying to suppress it. And it's all about intergenerational trauma. I mean, it's just epic. You've got Inside Out from Disney looking at the emotions. But there's an action movie, right? Like Ryan Reynolds. It's called The Adam Project. And again, it's like an action movie in a child. He goes back in time to meet his younger self and resolves his relationship with his dad. I mean, I'm just like, Hollywood's crushing it right now. Honestly, they've done more for inner child work than I have in 22 years of trying to bang that drum. So it's like, and I'm excited, and I love, and your book's an extension of that. It's like the artists of the world and humans of the world are calling to speak to this and make it normal and make it real. And you know, some people say to me, oh yeah, no, I've done inner child work once or twice. I'm like, if you'd done it, you'd know it's not a once or twice thing. This is a lifelong relationship with bringing lost and afraid parts of yourselves back home and integrating them into your whole. And it's like, it's actually just self-awareness. Like, if you're really into self-development, self-awareness, then it's like, we understand it's really about being our authentic self, but you can't be your authentic self if you've got hundreds of disgruntled teenagers in your system, like trashing the joint, right? It's just, it doesn't work. It's just not how it is. So I'm just so excited about your book. I think it's a really brilliant articulation of the healing journey. I think the truth of your struggle and the hope that you found and the love that you brought through it, the fact you've turned this into an expression for other people struggling, is just an incredible thing. And I think the words are charged with that power. So, you know, on this maiden voyage, as this book is launched, I encourage everyone that's watched this to buy it, to read it, to buy it for their friends. And certainly, you know, I don't think it's just for parents with children who see the world differently. I think it's for all parents. I think it feels like that for parents a lot of the time. I don't think parents are honest with other parents as much as they should about how hard it is to be a good parent if you've tried, if you want to. How we witness ourselves repeating the patterns of our past and find ourselves saying the things our parents said. And, you know, we happen upon these rules of unreasonable. I'm fine to hold space for my children's emotions whilst I feel that they're reasonable.
Yeah.
But if they're kicking off about something like irrelevant, how dare they? And I will educate them on the futility of their immaturity. It's like, oh man, such a dick, you know. So it's you know, all parents, but anyone that's been parented needs to read it too. You know, this is what it is to be human. And so many people that I had a happy childhood. It's like, I can guarantee you, if that's what you're saying, when someone says, hey, have you done any child work, or have you thought about looking in the past, they're like, I had a happy childhood. It's like, this isn't about the overall score of your childhood. It's like there's going to be hundreds of moments where it was awful.
Yeah,
that's what it is. And to go back and revisit those parts, people are like, oh, it's opening a can of worms. It's like, I don't open cans of worms. Those worms are already out of the can. They're causing trouble in your life right now, stopping you from taking courageous action, stopping you from asking for what you want, not being boundary. It's like, we're not opening cans of worms in FreeMind. We're rescuing kids.
Yeah.
I'm bringing them home, right?
Absolutely. Because I do feel all of our experiences are held. You know, Caroline Myers describes it as a sort of energy field, and every single decision we've ever made is held within this field. And I found that a really powerful kind of metaphor or idea for for, you know, that it's all there. Everything we've done, every part of our experience is there, and we can either welcome that and embrace it, or we can try and lop bits off and shut them in a cupboard somewhere. But it just doesn't work. They're still here, they're still present, and we either work with them and love them and nourish them, or they bite us on the arse.
Yeah, they work against us, so they sabotage us like hell, right? I mean, they will mess stuff up on purpose, right? For sure. Well, listen, I could speak for hours to you and about your brilliant book, but let's just, I just want to send it blessings. So if everyone's watching this, just take a moment to just wish this book. It's so lovely that it's about a boat in a storm, and so I feel like cracking a bottle of champagne across its bow and wishing it well on its maiden voyage, and may it sail far and wide and do the good that you intended. I think it's an incredible piece of art. With a beautiful message, and so just wishing you the very, very best with it.
And thank you so much for all of the foundations that went into making that possible, because I really feel that those foundations were really strong when I entered this storm, and that's led to me having the capacity to be able to do this in the context that I'm in. So I want to really thank you for that as well.
Oh, my absolute pleasure. Okay, excellent.
Thank you.
Bye. Take care.